Astrology night, the first Wednesday night of every month at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. For those of you who are watching on the internet, of which we have about 5,000 or so every month that watch this, you're welcome to join us next month.
Yeah, just come to Redmond and join us here for Soul Food. But before we get going tonight, Rick and I are doing our 9th annual retreat at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon. It's an amazing place. And Rick and I have been doing a forecast seminar this will be our 9th one. It'll be from January 9th through 11th.
Right, and what we do is we meet on Friday evening after dinner. Brighton Bush is a magical, magical place. This is actually one of the hot tubs, one of the pools at Brighton Bush. It's about an hour up in the hills out of Salem, Oregon, so it's an hour south of Portland and then an hour up into the mountains. Friday night we do what Jeff and I do here every month about the month ahead, except there we take a couple of hours, a little bit longer, and we talk about the year ahead, 2015, all the major transits and aspects for the year, the outer planet rhythms. And then on Saturday morning, afternoon, evening, and then Sunday morning, we get together as a group, and like we pick the names out of a hat here after we do our talk. What we do is we go through everyone's chart in the entire group. If you attend, you get your chart done. And typically the group's about 20 or so. And what the weekend becomes teaching astrology about the year ahead, but we get to look at the chart of every person who's a participant, which really fosters a real kind of group spirit, because we all get to know something about everyone else pretty quickly. It's a very fun and magical weekend. That this is our 9th year. Each year is different and each year has its own magic, and I look forward to it. I know Jeff does. If you're interested, you can find out more information by going to stariq.com and looking on the home page, on the front page there. There is a link that gives more information, or you can go directly to Brighton Bush. That's BREITENBUSH, brightonbush.com, and find the workshop. It'll be on January 9th through 11th. It's very reasonable. It's off the grid. You have no cell phone use there, and 3 meals a day are included, and it's very, very magical.
Great, I'll see you there.
I will see you there, January 9th through 11th.
All right, happy Sagittarius, everybody.
Yay!
It is a cold night here in Western Washington, but my heart and my mind are warmed by the fiery energy of Sagittarius, and I think we're lighter, brighter days are ahead.
Well, yes. And so are the other ones.
And the dark ones. All right. So we're living in a time of contrast.
And this month is a month of real contrast. On one hand, we do have this uplifting Sagittarius energy. Remember, Sagittarius is the archer. And the archer is pointing the arrows of inspiration into the distant night sky. It can go forever. Thoughts soar unrestrained forever. And so the idea is the upward lifting ideas and thoughts, those things which are bigger, better, more, the reaching for the distance. The arrow represents the human potential. The Sagittarius is half horse and half man. It's a centaur. And in some ways it represents that part of us which is getting up above the lower chakras and up into the humanness and separating us from the animal kingdom. We are part of the animal kingdom, but we are also something greater than. So this time of year is that inspiration. It's the hope. It's the leading toward the holiday season, toward whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever the solstice, whatever you celebrate, it's the potential of next year that's still all potential. It's not been ruined yet.
Yeah, the beauty of fire signs like Sagittarius is that you don't have to deal with reality. Fire is not about reality. It's not about the present. Fire is about the potential of the future. None more obvious an expression of that than Sagittarius. So when Rick talked about the half horse, half archer, we've seen plenty of Sagittarian energy, which basically is coming out of the horse's ass, which means having a big opinion without being grounded in reality. The school of astrology called esoteric astrology has its own perspective of things and says that the Earth, not Jupiter, is the key ruling planet of Sagittarius, which means if the arrow of your beliefs or your aspiration is going to fly true, you need to be grounded. Because aspiration on nothing other than aspiration equals bullshit.
Is that the horse's aspiration?
The horse's aspiration. And yet aspiration that's built on a foundation of real experience or a recognition of the world as it is allows us then to fly far, hit our target, and actually get back home.
Right, and the thing is, though, that this whole idea of flying far, Sagittarians, and Jeff talked about this, it can be too much hot air, too much opinion, too much belief, too much nationalism, too much spirituality, too much of anything that makes the idea ungrounded. I have a friend who calls Sagittarius exaggitarius. Because there's that idea of pumping the energy up so much that it can be inflated until it pops.
And one of the things that can happen, I think particularly with Sagittarius, and although I see a Sagittarius or two in the room, it's not about you necessarily personally. We're all a little bit Sagittarius. It could be. And it's more about you than it is about me. But we're all a little bit Sagittarius right now. And that's the idea of looking at astrology in this way. That we have collective cycles that we go through and that we can learn from and experience. But one of the challenges, I think, is that Sagittarius can be pretty absolutist. It's absolutely right or it's absolutely wrong. This is where you get prejudice. And it's ironic because we think of Sagittarius as very positive and open-minded, which is an aspect of this sign's energy. But once we're on a path of truth, whether it's political, religious, or as you said, spiritual, whatever, that arrow can become so pointed and narrow that nothing outside of it will be listened to, will be heard.
Yeah. You know, this time of year, we have the hopes that go up. Even the symbol of Santa Claus, in some way, the jolly, the fat, the too many gifts, all of this is kind of Sagittarius energy, even though the holiday itself falls in Capricorn.
Right, but what Sagittarius ever arrived on time? So it's perfect. Santa Claus is typically late Sagittarius. I'll get there when I get there.
So we have all of this uplifting Sagittarius energy going on. The other thing that's key through this month is that because Uranus is in a 7-year stay in Aries, a fire sign, these planets, normally when we talk about this being Sagittarius time of year, we're talking about the Sun in Sagittarius, but Venus and Mercury typically move very close to the Sun. And so what happens is that as the Sun and Mercury and Venus move through Sagittarius, they're going to make a trine with Uranus in Aries, another fire sign, and Jupiter in Leo, the third fire sign. So we're getting more than just Sagittarius. We're getting a real buzz this year from the Sagittarian energy as the Sun and Mercury and Venus trine both Uranus and then a little bit later, because it's in higher degrees, Jupiter. And so this adds even more to one side of the equation. We'll get to the other side in a bit.
What this is about in a larger sense, the slower moving patterns are the ones that are the most important. And we've been talking for several years about Uranus square Pluto, the challenging right angle between the planet of revolution in independent Aries and the planet of power, desire, suppression, shadow stuff, Pluto in Capricorn. And these two planets make their 6th of 7 exact right angle squares on the 14th of this month. Now that doesn't mean we're going to have a particularly Uranus-Pluto event on the 14th of this month, but it's a reminder that we are in the midst of a period of time of revolutionary change. Now that change may not happen externally, but pieces and parts like the infrastructure here in the United States may be breaking down that will lead to dramatic shifts later. One of the things that's been in the news so much lately has been police and minorities. And this is Pluto in Capricorn is the absolute authority of police and the organizations. And I'm not calling out cops, it's not good guys, bad guys here. But in looking at the symbolism, here's Uranus and Aries, which to some people, well, there's just wild, crazy people out there, and so it's a good thing that we have nice, suppressive cops to kill or put down the wild, crazy ones who will make our world crazy. But, now this isn't astrological, it's personal, it's political, and I won't hang out there very much. But this is all a distraction. Where is the real danger in our culture, and who holds the real power? The danger is not the poor, and the power is not in the hands of the police. So it's an interesting sort of perspective for me that some of the things that rile us up, and I'm not saying they're unimportant, but they do not represent the core of the cultural issues that shape the culture. So be aware, particularly in a month when Sagittarius, you're going to be around family, and if your family is like a lot of families, some of you are going to say, oh, those guys deserved it, they're crazy, they're all on crack, or, oh, the cops are abusive fascists. We've got a lot of tendency to stir this stuff up. And if you can have a calm conversation, you might learn something. But the fact is that Uranus square Pluto and the Sagittarian need to be enthusiastic and right can provoke arguments about things that have lost the nuance, the context, the real underlying elements that we're just seeing like a shadow play about.
Yeah, and I think the word that came to my mind as you were talking, actually several did, but was moral righteousness. This whole idea of, you know, of needing to identify with someone who has that moral authority behind them. Watch those people.
We have no moral authority, so Rick and I can talk about this with no problem. We are free.
Is there such a thing as a moral authority?
It's Sagittarius.
It is Sagittarius, that's right. Yeah. Well, Sagittarius is sometimes considered to be one of the party signs. I mean, it's the, you know, it's, Jeff and I had a conversation, I think it was last week, about the shift from the shadowy, dark, intense, heavy realms of Scorpio. And remember, Saturn is still in Scorpio. It escapes into Sagittarius later this month. We'll get there in a few minutes. But one of the downsides of all of this uplifting Sagittarius energy is that it's easy to go into denial about those things that are in the shadows. We're soaring so high, it's hard to remember what it was like down in the swamps. I wanted to say something, though, about about what's happening with the grand jury, or the lack of grand jury indictments in Ferguson and today in New York City. Which, again, regardless of your political perspectives, it is horrific. But regardless of your political perspectives, no judgment. Regardless of your political perspectives, I just want to make the point that, and I know we've said this over the last couple of years, that in astrology, when two planets are 90 degrees to each other, that's a dynamic tension. And you can often look back to when they were together, when they were conjunct, like at a new moon, to see what some of the issues might be about. And when Uranus and Pluto were conjunct in the mid-60s, this was the time of the civil rights movement in this country. Without making any judgment, okay, I am, but one way or another, the fact of the matter is that what we're seeing here with the alleged police brutality and with the lack of support from the courts is a bit of a distraction because there's an underlying issue that goes back to the innocence that we have at a new moon when Uranus and Pluto were aligned in the mid-60s, and these events were set into place. Now there's an awareness that those things that we thought were dealt with then might not have been dealt with as cleanly as we assumed.
Yeah, we've got another example of that in all the stories about rape culture.
Yes.
You know, in the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the 60s, we had a greater degree of sexual liberation, rising force of feminism, and now we're getting all of these reports back.
And Bill Cosby came to fame during that period of time, riding that moral self-righteousness.
Right, and if we look at it symbolically, we could suggest that the rape culture, which is the dominant it's the desire to dominate, which is Pluto in Capricorn, is challenging Uranus in Aries. Liberation, freedom, independence. The new thing is dangerous. Whether it is racial equality, whether it is gender equality, you know, we go through changes. And I think you're right, Rick. We're seeing upheaval now that is very much connected to the seeds of this cycle back in the mid-60s.
Two other things on the same note, and then we'll move on, because these are larger issues. And again, for those of you who have been coming regularly, we began talking about these when Uranus first moved into Aries back in March of 2000. And from 2000, you know, for the last 2 years, this Uranus-Pluto has been squaring, has been playing out. And will all the way through next year, and we'll be seeing the results of that even for another year or two. But just two other quick points. One is the whole rekindling of the energy that was the rise of the drug cultures in the 1960s, and the first wave of suppression around LSD and marijuana. And now we're seeing this from the other side. A lot of these, there's a movement that's large enough that ties what's happening now back to what happened in the mid-60s. And the last thing I wanted to mention, just in passing, is also the whole environmental thing, the issues, you know, the climate, you know, stories, the climate, you know, the reality of climate change or not, and all of this being so large in the political sphere. Again, a lot of that first came into public awareness or consciousness again in the mid-60s during the Uranus-Pluto conjunction.
Yeah, and I think a good way to contextualize this in Sagittarius is, do you have answers or judgment? Because coming to a judgment is easy to do.
I have judgment, just in case you
just by asking the question. Sure, we all do. But it is about the higher side of Sagittarius, offers the possibility of looking beyond the limits of our own immediate interests. You know, we tend to think of Sagittarius as sort of free and open, unless you think of it as marauding Vikings, which is another expression, or fraternity boys on a typical weekend. But it does offer, at its highest sense, the opportunity for us to remember to look above our lower animal nature or instinctive present preservation reality, to think about the future, to think about future generations. And that's the great gift, I think, of this season of the year.
So the exact Uranus-Pluto square is on the 14th. Right now, even here today on December 3rd, they're just within, I mean, a half a degree already. So it might just as well be considered that these two planets are square for the entire month of December. And then it eases off a little bit, and then for the 7th and final time next March, they hit that square point again. But as we've talked about in the past, what's important is not only the exactness or the closeness of the square, but when other planets move in and activate that square by hard aspect, meaning by conjunction or square or opposition, that's where the action is. And this month we have, as these planets in Sagittarius move through Capricorn, it's already been through the height of this month, last month rather, Mars already moved through the period, or through the phase of lining up with Pluto and squaring Uranus. but we have yet to experience this month and early next month both or all of Venus and Mercury and the Sun hitting that square and conjunction point. And so that's why it's more than just that date. And the actual squares are, the Venus hits those square points on December 20th. It squares Uranus and conjuncts Pluto, and Mercury does the same on Christmas Eve day on the 24th. And so we can imagine that the week of Christmas, the week prior to Christmas, there may be some political volatility cooking out there that might come into awareness.
You know, when we're talking about outer planets, it's really, as Rick points out, the faster moving inner ones that sort of trigger things. And tomorrow, Mars, the planet of action, leaves Capricorn, where Pluto is, and enters Aquarius, a sign that we associate with the planet Uranus. This suggests a freeing up of energy as early as tomorrow. Mars is how energy expresses itself. It's not the source of energy, but it is how it's expressed and delivered. Mars going into Aquarius tomorrow begins about a 6-7 week period of time in which the experimentation of Aquarius, the exploration of new and unfamiliar ways of acting and doing things, is likely to emerge in a more visible form. But before you get that mohawk or that tattoo on your face, I'd like to point out that on the 10th of December, Venus, Mars's consort, enters Capricorn. So it's the sign of authority and the sign of rules. So we've got a very interesting short-term cross-current, which is a liberation of energy over the next few days. We've got Mars going into Aquarius tomorrow. We've got a pretty lively full moon a couple of days after that. And yet, the resurgent forces of parental responsibility, practical reality, material concerns, and social responsibility may begin to speak more loudly when Venus enters authoritative Capricorn on the 10th.
And suppression. And suppression.
Shh, I told you not to say that. I don't think they're ready for that.
And again, with this juxtaposition of energies of Mars freeing up and going into crazy futuristic Aquarius, followed by Mercury, followed by Venus, and then Mercury, and then the Sun moving into Capricorn. Again, what this does is this exacerbates the square, the 90-degree angle between futuristic, freedom-loving, independent, lightning-striking, let it all happen right now. Doesn't matter what burns, strike that lightning, revolt, do it in the moment. That's the Uranus side of the equation. And Pluto says, not so fast. Pluto doesn't say no change. It just says, this is a process. This one strike and you're done. You know, the shock and awe theory is just a theory. There's a long process of this coming, arriving, being here, transmuting, metamorphosizing, and then the process of it going. And so we have this dynamic between the immediacy of the Mars going into Aquarius and the being free, and then the planets stacking up in Aquarius going, not so
Oh, in Capricorn.
in Capricorn,
yeah.
Not so fast. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a good point, Rick, because the word process really doesn't apply to planets. You know, planets are sort of like independent agents. They each have their own location in the solar system, and although they're bound together gravitationally, the planets are the raw, freer elements. They are not socialized per se, where the signs are an intellectual construct based upon our year divided up into 12 parts. The signs are a process. There's no such thing as Sagittarius. It's like Scorpio Part 2. Or it's pre-Capricorn. Or I could say the same thing. There's no real Capricorn. It's post-Sagittarius, pre-Aquarius. In other words, the idea is that process is very much about the signs. And as Rick was talking, it got me to thinking, What's the process that we can do this month in going from Sagittarius, aspirations, to Capricorn, accomplishments? What stage are you in relationship to your aspirations? Because if we're just simply going to be Sagittarian about it, we're not going to worry if we're going to catch the plane or the train. We're just going to show up at the airport and expect everything to work out. Clearly, life doesn't function all that well that way, and it's Capricorn that checks the schedule, that makes the reservation. So if you've got aspirations this month, and who doesn't have aspirations, well, it's learning to slow them down, and as Rick said, to see them as part of a process. Where are your desires coming from? What are you aiming toward? And in a very Capricornian way, what are the concrete, practical steps you need to take to make those ideals a reality?
I think I'm going to regret tonight for a long time. I think you've ruined a part of my life. I'm never going to be able to hear the word aspirations again without thinking the horse's aspirations. It's like,
that's because you don't do drugs anymore. So I think you should start again, and then you'll forget it.
Red wine and black coffee.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, so this whole idea, though, of these aspirations, I think reaches a height or a culmination of awareness at the full moon on the 6th. And we have a chart here of the full moon. The full moon is, the moon is in Gemini. Gemini is information. It's noisy. It's about connecting the dots. It's about all forms of communication. The full moon is always opposite the sun. And by the way, when you go out this evening, make sure you take time to look at the moon. The sky is really clear. Now, how many actually noticed the moon on the way here tonight? It's pretty wonderful. It's pretty wonderful. But the full moon is always opposite the sun. So the full moon in Gemini is going to be opposite the sun, plus all those other planets, Mercury and Venus, actually. It's not all those others. But the sun is lined up with Mercury in Sagittarius, and so we have this kind of like tightrope, like a tug of war between the active mind, Gemini, the moon on one side, and the drive to communicate it in ways that are detached and philosophical and meaningful. And I think that that's really the stress that defines the rest of the month.
Yeah, it's an issue of nearsightedness, which is Gemini, dealing with that which is immediate, versus farsightedness, which is very Sagittarian. So in a full moon, neither side is better than the other. The challenge is to be able to shift our focus from the short term and immediate to the long term. It's almost as if, imagine you're having something very important to say. There's a revelation that you got last night in your dreams, and you're ready to share it with someone, you know, the following morning, and there being the moon in Gemini. They're just buzzing around and telling you the 17 things that need to be done today. So there's this contrast between the big fat meaning that can take us much further than where we are in the here and now, and the here and now. And that's very much what this full moon is about. It's almost like learning how to shift your focus. Like imagine having a lens, and how can you skillfully shift from catching the object nearby when you need to see it, and shifting the focus to see the bigger, wider view.
And I think that this moon, this full moon, actually heightens the larger issue of the month. And here's the story. So the full moon is opposite all these planets, or in particular, the Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius. But we have Uranus forming a harmonious trine to Mercury and the Sun in Sagittarius, and forming a supportive sextile to the moon here in Gemini. So in a way, it's the lightning shifts of awareness that, aha, I got it. I see, I never saw it that way. I'll never go back and look at it the old way. The Uranus basically busts through the irresolvable tension of the small to the large, or the nearsighted to the farsighted, with an immediate sense of awakening. That's the good news. The bad news is the Uranus is square to Pluto, and we're not going to get one without the other. And in fact, that moon, which is getting support from Uranus, is forming an irritating quincunx to Pluto. Even though I see the solution, I know what the truth is, I can't change everything. There's a longer, deeper process. And all of the crazy making, lighting fires, yelling at my parents, grounding my kids, whatever it is that the Uranus thing says in the moment, right now, it's not enough. It's at conflict, in fact, with the larger picture. And there's, again, like Jeff said before about, you know, the sun to the moon, it's not like one's better or worse or right or wrong. I mean, obviously if the sun went out, there wouldn't be a moon. But, you know, if there was no moon, there would be no tide, there would be no action, there would be no life on Earth as we know it. So we have to work with both the energies. And that's what the quincunx to the moon in Gemini is, just thoughts, ideas, just interchange of information. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not, or a good idea or whatever, just give me that information. And yet it doesn't sit well with Pluto that says, this power structure ain't changing just because you have a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's well done, Rick. And maybe, you know, the problems and the resolutions are found usually in the same places. So if the problem is we have a moon in Gemini, so is it this or this? The resolution is it's this and this. Meaning, specifically with respect to Uranus, Pluto, I had the same idea as Rick, roughly, that what Uranus is trying to the full moon and sextile to the moon and trying to the sun allows us to step out of the opposition of any polarity we have in our life. Imagine those issues where it's this or this, where we're polarized, where we're into a binary situation. What Uranus offers is a third dimension, another dimension of awareness. But as Rick cleverly pointed out, Pluto ain't biting. So how do we deal with Pluto? I think it's a question of pace.
With great respect.
Well, with great respect, respect for geological time, respect for the longer, deeper, slower processes for which Uranus has no respect. So pacing ourselves, recognizing that you can get the brilliant insight in one moment, but it might take you 5 years to have it become fully manifest is, I think, a way to use that.
Exactly, and the metaphor in nature is that, again, Uranus is like lightning strikes. It's electrical, it's in the moment, it's like right now. Pluto is more like a glacier.
Yeah.
The power of lightning is focused in one point, and it can be very intense. But a glacier you can look at and it looks like it's not moving at all, and yet over the course of a century or 2 or 3, like Jeff said, geological time, a glacier not only can take down a forest, which a stroke of lightning can burn down a forest, but the glacier can take down the whole goddamn mountain. Because and so in a way, it's like keeping agile enough to react to the lightning strikes or to be the lightning, at the same time to be standing on your surfboard riding a wave that's actually a glacier. And so you're surfing on this thing that just is moving, you know, a 1/16 of an inch a month. And you can forget that you're moving, but you have time to constantly check your balance, and it's a harder thing to do, but it's the juxtaposition of that very fast and the very slow, I think, that really feeds the image of this month.
Yeah, we've got another indicator of that, because on the 8th of December, the same day that Mercury joins the Sun in Jupiter's home sign of Sagittarius, Jupiter itself stops dead in its tracks and begins moving retrograde or backwards, which it will do for several months. Now, when a planet is retrograde, it doesn't mean it's non-functional, but I think it means that there's an internal referencing. There's another, you need to be like a cow and have another stomach to digest the process. So if expansive, outgoing, visionary Jupiter in bold Leo is stopping, it's not saying you can't have the grand vision. It's saying, just as Pluto in Capricorn says, slow down and consider this process more carefully. Just one other thing I'd like to, I just want to share before I lose it, and that is maybe what we get on this full moon is a crack of consciousness that it's not going to change everything overnight. But if you get a tiny, you open your mind, somebody else's mind, change your process just a little bit without threatening Pluto and Capricorn and the whole mechanism, maybe over time, the new idea, the new method can be assimilated and applied.
Yeah, and I think you hit a key word that we sometimes forget about Jupiter, and that is Jupiter is also about assimilation. Its expansion means that you actually assimilate that which you've expanded into. And I think that sometimes we forget that process of just because we open our mind isn't enough. It's the what do we do with that which we allow in. And that becomes, I think, an important part, especially as the Sun and Mercury, which, you know, tomorrow and the next day, the Sun and Mercury trine Uranus, but then by the 12th, 13th, 14th, they both trine Jupiter. So we can see here that as the moon on the 11th is moving into Leo, lining up with Jupiter, it's getting a trine from Mercury and the Sun over the next couple days, and I think that the 11th, 12th, 13th are days in which, in particular, we will be particularly open to the excitement, to the potential. A lot of people travel this time of year, and maybe just the ideas, the hopes around the holidays or the new year might really play in or kick in then.
Yeah, but and again, I think taking the time to assimilate the process is important.
Yes.
Take, for example, the 10 most important books that you have in your house. If you tried to read them all in the course of, let's say, a month, you would probably learn less than if you took one of them and read that one over and over that month. It's, again, the process of deepening the learning. So there is at its best a scholarly side to Sagittarius. But again, I think in our sort of over-caffeinated, electrified culture, that sometimes we lose the ability, or we've lost some ability to take the time to digest their ideas. Does the brilliant insight you came up with, or you read in a book, or you heard from a speaker last week, is it going to still hold up next week? And that's, again, part of the pacing issue of this month.
So I think that the pacing runs into a bit of a problem on the 14th, which is the day of the exact Uranus-Pluto square, and the day when the Sun and Jupiter are trine. These are the two largest planets or things in our local solar system, and so there's some real harmonious energy. But also on that day we get a sextile between Venus and Neptune, and so there's the sense of the dream, of the fantasy, of the optimism. I think that the 14th is a very powerful day, and also a potential day for escape. We can fly up into the clouds of illusion and not want to come back down into the reality because it's tough.
But reality will always call. Hopefully it will, and certainly on the 16th, when Mercury, the messenger of the gods, the processor or collector of data, Mercury enters Capricorn.
Now look, we have 3 planets in Capricorn, whereas before they were all clustered in Sagittarius. This is one of the things that happens as the Sun changes signs.
Yeah, so imagine that you looked at a picture, let's say, of a busy city square, and you just saw basically seemingly random patterns of people moving, and occasionally you might see a sinewy line. Well, when we get into Capricorn, it's like, oh my God, you can see the underlying grid, the underlying structure. Look at that. There's guys with gray hats who all seem to be moving to the right, and ladies with red scarves who all seem to be moving to the left. This is the categorizing quality of Capricorn. It is the capacity and perhaps the need to see order and structure in a situation which may have been fluid prior to that point.
So, we get through the Uranus-Pluto square, but it's on the 20th that Venus actually joins up with Pluto and squares Uranus. And so again, even though it's a week after or a few days after the exact Uranus-Pluto square, I think we'll be really feeling it here.
Well, feeling it particularly in a Venusian way, which has to do with social values, with resources. It's not indicative of war, but it is indicative of some of the awkwardness of Uranian revolution and Plutonian suppression on a social Venusian level.
It may be indicative of the emotional processing that will come out this year around campfires where people are doing their solstice ceremonies, because the sun actually, the solstice is the following day on the 21st, actually at 3 p.m. here on the West Coast. And so at the time of the solstice, we have both Pluto and Venus still lined up and squaring Uranus, and we can assume that some of the feelings, some of the desire, some of the needs that we have, those Venusian things, may be really bringing up energy from much deeper than she usually does.
And this is very unusual in that we have a new season, the solstice. I say solstice, Rick says solstice. We've looked it up. It's both are acceptable, by the way.
I say orange, though.
Yeah, I say orange, if I'm in the West. At any rate, so we have the sun going into Capricorn, beginning the fall season north of the winter season north of the equator, the summer south of the equator, and then less than 3 hours after that, we have the new moon in Capricorn. So this is a highly cardinal. Cardinal means starting a season, so it's got a new season and a new moon all together. That's highly ambitious, but we have a paradox here, as we often do. The paradox is that new moons are naive. They're fresh, and yet Capricorn is probably the second least naive sign of the zodiac.
Maybe even curmudgeon.
Curmudgeonly so.
Yeah. I mean, Capricorn has the wisdom of old age. Even as, they say that Capricorns are born old and grow young. Right. Because there's that sense of taking on, and you see people often, I've noticed over the years, people with strong Capricorn influence or Capricorn rising or Saturn, Capricorn's planet rising, are often raised by their grandparents. There's that connection to old age even in youth. And so you're right, Jeff, we have the new moon at the very, very beginning of a sign where we now have 5 planets in this sign of kind of get there even if you're old.
Yeah, this is called a Benjamin Button new moon. They don't come up very often, but that's what it is. It's that mix of new and old. But think of it in a positive way. Imagine having the enthusiasm and freshness of youth with the experience and the wisdom of age. That would be a desirable expression of this particular new moon.
Yeah, that old Pennsylvania Dutch line, we get old too soon and smart too late.
That's great.
But here we're getting, you know, we're there, and we have that newness, we have the innocence of that new moon.
Yeah, there's something weird going on. Well, what's the planet of weird? Uranus. And what's Uranus doing on the 21st of December? Uranus is stopping dead in its tracks and beginning to move forward. So it's almost as if the adults are in one room figuring everything out, planning everything brilliantly, beautiful, Capricorn at its brightest and its freshness, and the kids in the next room are planning to blow all this shit up. So we're dealing with, as the desire for order grows with Capricorn, the wild hair of Uranus is being loosed upon us once again.
And that comes through in another way, because these kids who are planning to blow all this shit up have probably been planning it for a couple of years, because Saturn, which has been in Scorpio, which can hold on to a feeling if it knows that there's going to be resolution at some point in time. In some ways, Saturn in Scorpio is the I don't get mad, I get even. I mean, there's that, it's karma, but I have patience. And so what happens is that Saturn is at the very, 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 very end of its 2.5-year stay in Scorpio, and just a couple of days later, on the 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, Saturn moves from emotional, bound up, intense, passionate Scorpio into let it fly, let the arrow fly Sagittarius. But it's weird here because it's Saturn which holds back in Sagittarius, which lets it loose. And again, we have a juxtaposition. And just as a quick point, that Saturn will move up to about 2 or 3 degrees of Sagittarius, and then it retrogrades back next spring and then back again. It's not quite done with Scorpio, but here again we have this balance between two energies.
Yeah, and actually it's very easy to predict the future if you have a full and deep understanding of the past and the present. What I mean is this Saturn at the end of Scorpio sort of accumulated bitterness? Is this the point at which resentment has reached its maximum, and then you go Saturn into Sagittarius and you join the Aryan party or some religious group out of your fury and out of your anger? So if you're bitter and mistrustful, then it's likely that the shift of Saturn into Sagittarius will just give you some moral, political, or philosophical justification for your unresolved resentment. If, however, and probably it's not one or the other, we have mixes, but insofar as there has been a facing Saturn of the shadow Scorpio, a willingness to confront the shadow within ourselves and embrace it as part of our whole experience, well, then the little angels get their wings in Sagittarius, and Saturn in Sagittarius becomes institutionalized generosity rather than crystallized judgment. So it depends what you do with Saturn in Scorpio in terms of what's most likely to occur when Saturn goes into Sagittarius.
And so we now have Saturn that's bumped into Sagittarius, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in Capricorn. This is on Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas Eve. But look at Mercury here at 11 degrees of Capricorn, and on Christmas Eve it hits 12 degrees of Capricorn. It lines up with, it's already pretty damn close, it lines up with Pluto and squares Uranus. So even though now it's a good week and a half, 2 weeks after the Uranus-Pluto exact square, the fact that Mercury comes whizzing through, the fastest moving of the real planets, and joins up with deep dark Pluto, and we communicate and we say those things which we normally hold to ourselves. On Christmas Eve, we're with our parents, we're with our kids. Whoops. It's going to be an interesting little family get-together this year, I think, for Christmas. At least that's, and then it squares Uranus, and so who knows what kind of crap goes down once you bring it out, or someone brings it out into the open.
And if I recall correctly, the past 2 Christmases have also been, what's the nice word? Horrific, I think, is the word that comes to mind. But
the nice word. So as we go through Christmas, and we reach the end of the year and we kind of looking ahead. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to say here, just very briefly, and this is actually a whole talk. There's an article on Star IQ about this, but it has to do with the astrological origins of Christianity and this thing that we call the Christmas star. And the Christmas star, we'll never know exactly what the deal is, but we do know that it's something that everyone didn't see. The Chinese didn't notice it. They were watching the heavens. And it's very apparent that the Magi is a word like a rabbi is a Hebrew priest. Magi were Zoroastrian priests, and they watched the movement of the planets. And it's very likely that what we call the Christmas star, or the Star of Bethlehem, was actually a conjunction, an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn. That happens every 20 years. It's the thing that makes the decade. Our calendar, Jupiter-Saturn joined up in 1900, 1920, 1940, 60, 81, 2001. It's the thing that marks the decades. However, every 5 centuries, 4.5 centuries, that alignment changes element. And when it does, it's called a grand mutation. And in 3-4 BC, the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn was one of these grand mutations, and it's very likely that the Magi saw this unfold and they went to look for the event to fulfill the imagery, hence the astrological origins of Christianity. And just in case you think that this all just really happened the way it was said, there was a religion about 300 to 400 years before the birth of Jesus called Mithraism. Mithras was the alleged son of God, born on the winter solstice of a virgin birth to save mankind, and died and was reborn again on the spring equinox. So the image of what we have as the basic creation myth of Christianity existed 400 years before the birth of Jesus, and actually has some astrological orientation. And there's a book by the counter back here that is a book called The Gift of the Magi, Christmas for the New Millennium. It's a book that I wrote a handful of years ago with this story in it and some poems. It's on sale tonight, and I'll say more about that when we end so that everyone else doesn't have to listen to this too. But it's here.
Great, thank you, Rick. So what's the good holiday gift? Whether Christian, pagan, Mithraist, or whatever you choose to be. Well, maybe it is Saturn and Sagittarius, which is to commit yourself to a better future, whatever that means for you. And the thing is, the Saturn and Sagittarius version is not bullshit. It's not an empty promise, because that's not how Saturn rolls. It's about a commitment. It's a commitment to yourself, that when you meet the limits of your beliefs and your prejudices and your expectations, you just push that wall out a little bit further.
Right. And Grant Louis, who's an astrologer who wrote in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, said that Saturn and Sagittarius would rather have a flag on a mountaintop far away that it knows that it will never reach, but have that as a goal, than to be able to reach a goal. See, Capricorn wants to get to the top of the mountain. Sagittarius just wants to know that there's a mountain to reach.
Right.
There's a difference. Right. And so I think what you said is really true. It's about pushing again and again and knowing that we may never reach that place, but being on the right path rather than the path that will get us to where we're going.
So that's our overview for this last month of 2014. We're going to take about a 15-minute pause, during which time we invite you to put your first name and your birth data, time, date, and place of birth on a piece of paper. Rick and I will, by chance, pick 3 of them and give little mini readings after the break. During the break, we encourage you to invest in your community by buying holiday gifts here at Soul Food, having an extra 10 or 15 cups of coffee, eating up last week's unfinished donuts at full retail price as your act of generosity for this holiday season. So thank you, Soul Food. Thank you, Rick. We're going to meet you all back here in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Makia, Aaron, whoever else is here.
And Julie.
And Julie. Thank you, Julie.